welcome Dr. Bridget R. Cooks to Career Week, our first virtual Career Week for the AUC Art Collective. And I just wanted to introduce you, Dr. Cooks, to Rachel Brown, our program manager, Lauren Harris, our program coordinator, Jasmine Wilson, our graduate research assistant, and Dr. Bernita Webb-Bender, one of our faculty in the Department of Art and Visual Culture, teaching art history. And of course, a number of our students are here, and they'll probably be having a good time with you as you conclude your talk to answer questions. I wanted to just say a couple of words to introduce you all to someone that I know you're already very familiar with through her award-winning research and her first book, Exhibiting Blackness, African Americans in the American Art Museum. As I've shared with you, Dr. Cooks, we use your book in our curatorial studies program, in our art history courses as well. I'd like to say that it's like a Bible for us, and we are ever grateful to you for your scholarship and your thoughtfulness and working on that so diligently. Dr. Cooks received her PhD from the University of Rochester. And I wanted to point out too, as this is a course that talks about career pathways, a talk in our program that talks about career pathways, that Dr. Cooks' program at the University of Rochester, I would say, was at the time and continues to be a very innovative program as PhDs go in art history, in that she specialized in visual and cultural studies at the time. So these are debates that we have, and I know that there's students that are on today who are art history majors about the changing understanding of what does it mean to be an art historian, how do you teach that, what's the historiography of the field, and also what are the theoretical implications. And in the early 2000s, there were conversations about, do we call this visual studies? Do we call this visual culture studies? Is it still art history? And so on. So these are some of the kinds of things that in Dr. Cooks's very innovative program, she as a scholar was really benefiting from when she was in graduate school. In addition to her work as an art historian, though, Dr. Cooks is also a really amazing curator. And I just want to mention a couple of the shows that she's done recently, an exhibition of the work of Richard Mayhew, the painter, at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, an exhibition of the work of Grafton Tyler Brown, a California artist at the Pasadena Art Museum, one of my favorite artists, I just have to say, hands down. Like, I wish I had a Grafton Tyler Brown, and one of my favorite art museums. And also Ernie Barnes. She did a retrospective of Ernie Barnes at California African American Museum. But I wanted to also just mention a couple of things that she's working on now with regards to her curatorial practice. She's working on an exhibition called the Black Index that she's going to share something with us today about that exhibition. And she's also working on a book called Norman Rockwell, The Civil Rights Paintings. And I think without further ado, I'm going to share, pass on the floor of the screen to Dr. Cooks, and we'll get into it to hear about her career path. Thank you again for joining us.
Okay. Can everyone hear me, and can everyone see a slide, that black slide with white text?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So all of you, somehow on my screen, you've all disappeared. I only see my PowerPoint. So I don't think that's anyone's fault, but I can't see your body language. But I'll keep talking. If you need to tell me something, you want to raise your hand, you should make sure I can hear you. So first, thank you to Dr. Shel Finley, who's someone I admire a great deal and have known for a number of years and don't get to see enough of. I'd also like to thank all of the people who have helped to put this career week together. There's so many really wonderful resources that students have available to them that we didn't have when we were in school. And so it's a real honor to participate. And I'd like to thank all the other people who have helped to put this together. Bernita and Rachel, who I just met in particular, for doing the work that you're doing and for helping this program exist. I think that the AUC Art History and Curatorial Studies Collective is really on the map internationally, and I'm honored to be involved with it whenever I'm called upon. So thank you for your time and attention. What I want to do today is present some things about my career trajectory. I'm going to speak for about half an hour, and I'm going to try to give you a sense of purpose in my life in terms of my career. And I mean, I want to say something now. I mean, 2020 has been such a difficult year. It's been one shocking event after another. We get a year's worth of news every 2 days. And I think because we are surviving this year, and there will be challenging years in the future, there have been challenging years in the past, it's important for us to think about having real meaning in our lives. So we have, personal lives and different ways that we fulfill ourselves in that way. I think for me, my professional life has also been a part of my life's purpose. And I'm going to share some information with you about some of my mentors who really helped to instill that sense of purpose in me. The reason why I say my professional life, it's not just a job for me, it's because through my work, I'm able to connect with quote unquote real life issues, so that I think about, especially for Black people, issues of mourning, issues of illness, issues of violence. How can I get up in the morning and do my job if I feel like it's very disconnected from those things that really impact me on a deep emotional and psychological level? So I think many people do that, and it's good to have some separation. I also think for me, it's been helpful to have a connection between the two, the things that impact me every day and the work that I'm doing. So I just wanted to say that to kind of give you a perspective, my perspective on how that kind of, there's that relationship between those parts of my life. So there's also 3 themes that I want to relay to you, because they are themes that work throughout my entire career. And these are things that, on this side of a kind of education and writing and a lot of build up, like to where you are in your studies now until you get to have a career, and then you become a senior person in your field. Sort of being at that point, looking back, I have these 3 themes that I just wanted to mention to you. So number 1 is trust. Number 2 is research. And number 3 is mentorship. And I'll just say something briefly about each of these things to keep in mind. And this is the kind of old lady giving her wisdom to the next generation. So it's kind of a funny moment for me. But to say something about trust, I would say to trust your vision. Use your life experiences to help you figure out your direction in your research topics. What's exciting and scary about being a student is that often you'll have a vision of the way things could be, but you don't necessarily have anyone around you who can see it the way that you can see it. And often, because you need a job, and you'll take a job because you need to pay the rent, or you have family who are depending on you, you can lose track of that vision. And I think that there's a real value in keeping the vision and doing what you need to do to pay the rent. But the vision is something that you really can lose. And so I know that when I was a student, I had a vision and I kept it. I did other things. I worked at the LA Zoo. I ran a dry cleaners. I had many different kinds of jobs, but there was a vision that really helped me stay focused. Research is really important to keep yourself informed. It's important to know that everything has a history. Every story has multiple sides. You are accountable for those histories and for those stories. It's a very serious responsibility. And it's a matter, I think, of integrity to be confident. And the reason that you can be confident is because you've done your research. So research involves a lot of reading. It involves talking to people, introducing yourself to people you don't know. All of that is really important if you're going to actually grow and have a foundation to stand on. Okay. In mentorship, I would say listen to other people. You don't have to always take their advice, but if they're offering you some information, try to see what's helpful about it. Change when you need to, and that's a difficult thing to know. Be creative, know what's valuable and what's not. And none of those things are easy. All of those things happen with a certain amount of risk. And it goes back to trust and research and having a kind of cycle to be able to grow and to innovate. So I wanted to talk to you today about my trajectory. I'm talking about being at one point in my life and career and looking back. And so I want to kind of look back with you to see how maybe there's something I did that might be helpful or some lesson that I learned that you might benefit from. So I will say that when I started college, I was an art major. I wanted to be a painter. And I quickly realized I didn't know much about the history of art at all. And I wanted to know something about what other people had done so that I could know what I wanted to do a little bit better. So I added art history as a second major. And I grew up in Los Angeles, fourth generation. I grew up a couple of miles away from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. But we didn't go into the museum very much. It was expensive. And there was a park nearby, and we would, my family, my mother, my sister, and I would go to the park and have lunch. We'd bring sandwiches and roll down this big green hill, go home and take a nap. But I did know that the museum was this sort of wonderful monumental site and that something special was happening there. And eventually when my mom did get a membership, when I was a little bit older, it really did open up new worlds to me. So when I started taking art history classes, I was really excited. I was completely seduced by all the narratives of like Vincent van Gogh cutting off his ear and giving it to a prostitute. And it was like, these people in Europe, like, what is going on? It was a lot of drama and it was really fascinating. And then I realized that there were no Black artists in my textbooks. And the only Black artists that I knew of were my professors in studio art, two great artists, Pat Ward-Williams and Ed Burrell. And I started to figure out that there was a lot that needed to be done, a lot of research that needed to be done in the field of art history. And so I applied to graduate school. And as Dr. Finley said, I went to the University of Rochester in a program called Visual and Cultural Studies. And that program still exists. It was only about 4 or 5 years old when I enrolled. And so it was considered experimental and then innovative. And now I think it's a bit more mainstream, and that's okay. I think that means that we're making some kind of progress in academia. But I went to the art library at the University of Rochester to try to get all their books on Black artists. And every single book was written by Deborah Willis. And I said, okay, who is this woman? How do I find her? And, what can I learn from her? So It's a much longer story, but I was able to locate her and introduce myself to her. This is before the internet, so it wasn't so easy to make contact with someone. It was essentially a kind of cold call, um, where I reached out to her, left a message, and then she contacted me, and it changed my life. So she invited me to apply for a job working with her at the Smithsonian on an exploratory exhibition that was called Imagining Families. And our task was to present an exhibition to see if there was enough public interest for an African American museum. People in the government who were going to approve this exhibition were very skeptical. And I think they were really just kind of tolerating us, this idea that we had, that there could be an entire museum dedicated to African American people. And so it was kind of a joke. We got this very small space in the Arts and Industries building. Deborah Willis was the curator. She hired me to be the educator. And over 20 years later, the National African American Museum of History and Culture opened. But it started with this small show, and that was the beginning of my relationship with Deborah Willis. So I actually want to show you a clip of this really wonderful film. It's almost 5 minutes. I want to show it to you because it really gets across why Deborah Willis's work is so inspirational, and she's inspired generations of people. Dr. Friendly's actually in this video. She is my sister in this kind of relationship with Deborah as this wonderful scholar and person. And so I wanted to share this with you because she really is a gift. And I think even by looking at this short film, you'll get a sense of why.
I had a teacher who said that I was taking up a good man's space when I was in school. He said, all you're going to do is get pregnant, have a child, and a good man could have been in that seat. I didn't want to go back to Philadelphia because they're going to see me and I'm pregnant. I'm not going to be an artist. And this is going to happen. And then I said, what? I had to recognize that I was falling right into a trap of being somebody's othered stereotype. So I created this piece that says a woman taking a space from a good man, and then the accusation, you took a space from a good man. And then I made a space from a good man. So I flipped the image by saying I made a space for a good man.
The family piece seems to come up a lot in your work, mm-hmm. and you've shared some family images here with us today. Can you talk about the influence of family photography?
We were a close family. For my mother had 13 brothers and sisters. My father had 10 brothers and sisters. So I had 50 first cousins growing up. So it was all of us all the time. We had fun. We did everything. We didn't need, quote, friendships outside. My father loved the everyday aspect of taking.
Oh, what happened? I'm going to move forward here.
For my mother had 13 brothers, and on many occasions, just looking at my mother, looking at me so adoringly, that it just really, I saw that image. I said, wow, Mom, this is just so moving for me to see that. And I had no idea what that meant to her. Growing up in her beauty shop, there were a lot of rules, but there was also a lot of listening to stories. And I love, listening to women and about relationships, but I didn't know what they were talking about, but they all were supporting each other. I I did not have any Black photographers in my history books. And I knew, based on growing up in a beauty shop in my mother's house, that there was Gordon Parks, there was Roy Tigarava, and then there was my father's cousin who had a studio down the street, and a Black photojournalist, Jack Franklin, who photographed during the civil rights movement and very active in Philadelphia. So I knew that their stories were somewhere. I had not realized until you contacted me that it's 25 years since Picturing Us, which I had no idea that it just seems like yesterday. I remember it so well. It was the outline for me, and I like the idea of the roadmap because I think that was the beginning for me to think about how I could move forward in images, from images of writing about dolls to think about writing about family history memory. I've met, through the 6 years of creating Black portraitures, so many younger scholars who are writing about images and recycling some of the old stories, but new stories are developing. And they're visionaries. I think that that's the next step. But we need to find a place for these voices. That's something I want, to create something not only as an archive, but also a place where other scholars can read about images from the diaspora about Black people. Collaboration is a central way for me to continue working with intergenerational aspects of it. And that's something that I think is really central. Debs loves joy, as you know. There's some difficult moments in our lives that we can't ignore, but we need to find ways to tell stories about survival, about resistance, about resilience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hang on one second. Okay. I wanted to make sure you saw Dr. Finley on one side of Deborah Willis and Deborah Willis's son, Hank Willis Thomas, on the other side. That sense of appreciation for her and having her at the center, sort of making things happen, is a major theme of her life. And it's one of the things I really benefited from. And you get a sense of her generosity as a scholar, but also as a mentor. I love that very short video. And I hope you're sort of getting the spirit of it that I'm also feeling when I'm talking about her. So working with Dr. Willis encouraged me to focus on museums. Working with her opened up a new direction for me to think about my vision. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work with Black artists, and I knew I wanted to write. I didn't have enough experience at that point to really know that equaled a particular job. But she helped point me in that direction, and she gave me opportunities to try to succeed or fail and figure out what I needed to do for a career. So I had internships at the National Gallery in DC, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the National Gallery, the Oakland Museum, and then I had my first full-time job at Blackness. So this is where I grew up. This is a picture from the 1960s. The buildings have been totally demolished now, and they're rebuilding new structures. But I show it to you because this is such a big part of how I got into museums, was being near LACMA. And so I worked there for 4 years, and then I got a job teaching. When I was working at LACMA for 4 years, I was writing my dissertation, which part of it became exhibiting Blackness. But it's pretty, the book is pretty different from the dissertation. But then I found myself applying for jobs outside of museums because I wanted to do more research and writing than my job in education at LACMA allowed me to do. And then I got hired at Santa Clara University, which is this gorgeous university about an hour from Oakland in San Francisco. And I was quite frankly just terrified to be a professor, because in my mind, in my experience, professors were always this larger than life kind of figures that knew everything. And, and I got this assistant professor job, which is the entry level. And I worked there for 5 years. I got tenure, and then I was recruited. This is where my office is, at UC Irvine, where I had gone to college. So I've been here now for 13 years, and I've been able to successfully write the Exhibiting Blackness book from here. And I've also curated exhibitions that Dr. Finley has mentioned. So let me show you some more images. I'm keeping my eye on the clock. I think I've been talking for about 20 minutes, so I have maybe 10 minutes left, which would be fine. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about this book cover. So this is the cover of Exhibiting Blackness. It's a photograph that could never be reproduced because the building is gone. This gallery is gone. My mother and father are sitting in the middle of the image. My mother's looking at this painting by Mary Cassatt, a very idealized picture of white motherhood. And my dad is looking at a painting called The Cotton Pickers, which is at LACMA. And, thinking about history of Black people, both of my parents picked and plucked cotton. And this is in the 19th century American wing, a wing that I did a lot of research in when I was a student working at the museum. The blurry figure is me, and I wanted to be both present and absent to try to embody a kind of precarious position that Black people have with museums. And on the far right is this wonderful guard, Abraham Agonafir, who he and I became friends. And he agreed that he would be on the cover as long as no one would recognize him. And he has since retired. But it was wonderful to be able to conceptualize and direct an image to give viewers a sense of what the book was about. So these are some of the questions that I wanted to answer through the book. These are questions that I had based on my time working in museums, and I wanted to be able to have the time to do the research to try to figure out the answer. So, what is the role of art by African Americans in mainstream art museums? That's the big question. Which artworks by African American artists are regularly on view, and why? How does knowledge about the artist's race influence what you think and say about the artwork? What do the object labels for artworks by African American artists say? How are African American artists incorporated into the museum's identity? And if you're keeping up with what's going on in the art world now, I think you'll agree that these are still very important questions. And it seems like the media is just beginning to recognize that these are questions that need to be addressed. So I know that you've had time to look at the book, and I'm thrilled that you're reading it. That is regularly read in the program at Spelman. And I'll just show you briefly some pictures that are already in the book. I start with the first exhibition of art by African American people that was in the Art Institute of Chicago in the 1920s. And then I look through the 1930s and 40s at major exhibitions, contemporary Negro art, which was at the Baltimore Museum of Art. These two little kids looking at this sculpture by Ronald Moody, who was a Jamaican American. The 1942 exhibition of Jacob Lawrence's Migration of the Negro. I look at Harlem on My Mind, which I think is the most cited chapter from the book, the first blockbuster exhibition in the United States, the first exhibition that the Met ever had about Black people, and the only exhibition they ever had that didn't have any art in it. So it was a strange moment. But to give you some idea of what the show looked like, there were photographs in it, but at the time, photography was not considered art. It was considered images created by a machine. And, so that's why when you go to the library and you look at art books, they're in the in section. When you look at photography, they're in the TR section, because that's the technology section. 2 Centuries of Black American Art, an incredibly important exhibition that really argued that there were Black artists, to the dismay of the mainstream art world and also to their dismissal. I think because of the lack of time, I'm going to show you maybe a minute of David Driscoll speaking. He's someone that we lost this year because of COVID. And he was an incredible scholar, artist, art historian, curator. And I think, like the video that I showed you of Deborah Willis, just even a minute of this will give you a sense of how inspirational and passionate Dr. Driscoll was about his work.
For me, this concept of otherness is to try and define what there is in American culture that, first of all, keeps us separate and apart, and looking back historically, and in my case, the visual arts, is how it came about, why it came about, and so forth. So I have gone back to images and to the media, and looking at how African Americans were portrayed in the media, buffoonery, and things of that nature, the stereotype, the derogatory image, and so forth. And the question, what brought about that unkindness amongst people? Why is it that somebody had to think that by degrading another individual, looking at that person derisively, they elevated themselves? What in any religion, what in any culture tells them to do that?
Yeah.
For me,
so such sort of simple, basic questions. I have a friend who once she introduced me to someone, and she couldn't, I think, remember like all the long titles that you get when you have a job. And she said, Bridget, she teaches art history, and she's really interested in why people are so mean to each other. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty much what I do. But I think I got this from personal experience, but also in part based on my my time studying the work of and sitting at the feet of David Driscoll. This is one of the paintings that he talks about in that longer clip, where he's looking at 19th century painting and thinking about the role of African Americans in American culture. The exhibition that he created was very influential, and this is a clip of him on Good Morning America with Tom Brokaw, the first time that Black art really got a national mainstream platform. I talk about the Blackmail Exhibition that opened at the Whitney in New York, traveled to the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and sparked a number of other exhibitions in response to it, exhibitions that expressed different ideas of Black masculinity. And then I end with a discussion of the Gee's Ben exhibition from 2002, The Quilts of Gee's Ben, and talk about issues of exclusivity in the mainstream museum regarding age, race, gender, and class, and how the work by these Black women in quilts in Alabama really created a challenge to business as usual in American museums. Okay. So should let's see, I think I'm going to stop sharing for a second just so I can see you. Cheryl had to step away for a second, I think. No, Cheryl.
I'm here.
Should I keep going? Are we doing, or should we open it up for questions?
Yeah, I think it would be great to open it for questions now.
Okay. Thank you. So I have some more slides about exhibitions that I'm working on and exhibitions that I've done. I can show you those if anyone has any questions about those. I'm more than happy to answer specific practical questions that you might have as students of how you get from where you are now to the next step.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cooks. Are there any questions? And maybe the best way to go about this is if you would like to unmute yourself to ask your question.
Sure, I have a question.
Hi, Destiny. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Cooks. It's so good to see you and everyone else.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
So I'm really interested in knowing, I guess, how somebody in my position as a graduating senior might navigate wanting to have experiences in different segments, I guess, of the art world. So I'm interested in sort of exploring what the for-profit side looks like, because all of my experience is in museums. So how can I practically do something like that, especially in a moment like this?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. One is Dr. Finley's own trajectory working in the art market, because I feel like she's one of the few people I know in the field who, she's a scholar, she's a professor, art historian, and she has this other life before the current position where you're doing appraisals and aware of how the ins and outs of auction houses work. I never explored that, but I'm really curious about it. And there are programs like in Christie's where you could learn about how that works. The art market is such a part of art history, and it's a part that isn't necessarily really talked about in art history. But we think about the resale of different paintings, how the art market impacts what gets purchased at museums, and what's in museums impacts publishing, and that is our foundation of art history. What we can read, the texts that are available to us. So I think that's one thing to think about as one way to get more experience in a different area. Another one I would think about is the Next Haven program in Connecticut. So this is a program that was started maybe 3 years ago now by Titus Kaphar, contemporary artist who went to Yale. And he is not affiliated with Yale, but wanted to create some kind of institution to give back, particularly for Black recent MFA graduates from Yale, because he says that they don't learn about the art market or how you navigate your work as a business, right, after you've kind of honed your craft. And his program involves high school students, emerging curators, and recent MFA grads. And they work together. There's a publication for the exhibitions that happen there. There's a gallery space, there's studio space. And there's also now a house that's next to the studios where people who are involved in the program can live. Mm-hmm. So, this is all due to, I would say, those three things that I mentioned before, that trusting, research, and mentorship. I believe in that. I have benefited from it. I've been taught that. I think that Titus Kaphar, in my conversations with him, can also testify to that being an important part of his career. I think a couple of years ago, he won the Macarthur Genius Award, which is, I think it's $625,000 as a gift for being good at what you do. And you cannot apply for it. You have to be noticed and tapped on the shoulder. So when he got that grant, that fellowship, he tried to figure out, okay, what can I do with this to really help other people? And so that's another opportunity that comes to mind.
Can I add to what you're saying, Bridget, if you would, Dr. Cooks?
Yeah.
And thank you for the question, Destiny. So, to your point, especially on Titus Kaphar and Next Haven, I think if we also would look at someone like a Mark Bradford, who did something quite similar, actually, in your own native Los Angeles, Art Plus Practice. We didn't get a chance to go there because they weren't open in January, February, Destiny, but it's a similar kind of space that's exhibition space. But what's really interesting about Art Plus Practice too is that, rooted in, the so-called community in and around and near Leimert Park, one of the things about Art Plus Practice is that in addition to having an exhibition space, in addition to working with curators, in addition to having, say, internship opportunities for students and emerging curators, they also work with people in the community who need help with job placement, resume writing, cover letter writing, and things like that. And I would say where Next Haven is concerned too, one of the things that Kaphar was interested in is really trying to uplift the communities of color in and around New Haven that are often not recognized and noticed as much as they should be. Another thing I would add to that too is that we can have a conversation offline, all of us together about, or individually, about ways that you might enter into, say, the art industry or the art market, either through the course that I'll be teaching over the January term, or just in terms of thinking about, who you might reach out to and what might be some of the entry-level positions that would be available to you graduating. I would say that, my own trajectory was one where I got a job working as a curator for an individual collector who owned an artist collection. And then from there, got into art appraisal and apprenticed with someone. The apprenticeship method is something that's still very much a part of many professions, of course, the art profession itself, and also I think in certain parts of curatorial and art industry practices. So I'm going to stop there. And I think Neil Gradsky had a question in the chat, maybe.
Hello, everybody. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. I was just looking at your sentence there.
Yes, I was just piggyback off what you were saying. I actually live in the Greater New Haven area, so I've gotten to visit Next Haven a couple of times, and it's a really nice space, and they're doing a lot for the community. So I just want to add that.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, and I know that there was a show there recently of Titus Kaphar's work, some big prints, and the work that he had on the cover of Time magazine this summer. Yeah, that was up too. So. Yeah, it's exciting. And, but when Mark Bradford and Titus Kaphar were envisioning what has become, their two different institutions, I don't know about just having models just ready. It's like they had to have their vision and convince people that space needed to be made. And now they're able to get outside funding.
Well, I think one of the models actually, and this can be like a whole nother, offline conversation too, but one of the models is Project Row Houses,
Oh, that's true.
So there, I think that
yeah, it's been around a long time. Go ahead.
Right, and it's a really interesting conversation. Each of these three individuals have all been awarded Macarthurs, and I don't think that it's a coincidence. Because of what they're trying to do to take what they've done as practicing artists, as people who work with culture and who care about community, to give something back. And there are other models that are similar to these as well that that we could discuss. But it's exciting, and I think that these are ways that even for everyone here on our Zoom today can think about how they might want to envision themselves doing the kind of work that they want to do as aspiring curators and art historians.
Yeah, and thanks for that, because then it made me think about a newer project, Kehinde Wiley's Black Rock.
Yeah.
And then Theaster Gates's Social Practice. And they're all pretty different in their own ways. They're all unique. But I think what's great about the difference between my generation and your generation as students is those kind of places didn't exist when I was growing up, and for you, it's like, you're going to be thinking about the next step after that. What else can you dream of? What communities do you want to be engaged in? How do you want to use your knowledge base and your skill set to make the world a better place? And I know that sounds lofty, but that's what everybody's doing, in their own way. And, in your own arm's reach, what can I do where I am? So, only a handful of people every year win this genius grant, right? The Macarthur Award. But it's great to see what they're doing with those resources. And it does make us think about what can we do with the resources we have.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, how you doing? I had a question.
Hi.
So my question was around, I guess, in the studying of Harlem on My Mind, like it's often positioned as a show that's, I guess, not really beneficial to the community, or wasn't as beneficial as it was supposed to be. But I feel like one of the most interesting things in studying it was the amount of visitors that actually visited the show. And I believe it was like one of the most visited shows like of that time. And recently I was studying the deluxe show put on by the Manil collection. And it was something similar there, where like the artists of the community didn't really appreciate or didn't see the value of the show as much as some of the other people in the community, like the children, like Ernie Barnes from the deluxe show. And I was wondering, like, through your research, have you seen this like paradox or like connection elsewhere, or like maybe the collection like was supposed to like be like good for the community, but didn't listen to like the voices of the community as much as they should have, but ended up not really completely flopping, but having benefits in some areas, but not in others?
Yeah, it's a great thing to think about, because you are absolutely right. The Harlem on My Mind show was tremendously influential, and Deborah Willis has talked about going there as a young person and being totally amazed that it had a huge impact on her deciding to write about photographers. And all of that sits alongside the controversy, the men who were the curators who wanted to do their own vision of Harlem, and some of the Black photographers that wouldn't be in the show, like Roy DeGarava, but someone who was in the show, James Vandersea and Gordon Parks, so there's no one mind, we talk about the Black community, and I know that it's a term that even I use, I suppose, maybe I don't, but it's kind of a shorthand. But I think we know there is no Black community. Like, we are very diverse. We have different opinions. That's why Blackness is everything, right? Because we are all of those things. So I think what I really like about what you said too is that it's beneficial in some ways, and in other ways it wasn't. It's complex. And that's so important, I think, for us to keep in mind as critical thinkers, that it's never all one way when it comes to reception. So Deborah Willis was aware of some of the controversy of the Harlem on My Mind show, most of the things that I wrote about in that chapter were not just common knowledge. She knew about it, and she was just excited to see what it was all about, you know, and got really swept up in the beauty of Black people through those pictures. That's a real thing. And I think, yeah, there's more to say. I keep thinking about this controversy with the Philip Gustin show, which some of you may know about. So Philip Gustin, a white artist who was passed, made a lot of different kinds of paintings in different styles. He has a series of work that show these Klansmen. And there's one self-portrait of himself with a Klan hood on. And largely it's thought that because his family escaped the Holocaust, that he's absolutely against racial violence of any kind. And at the same time, he seems to have struggled with anti-Blackness because of the way he showed himself with that hood. And many people have seen these paintings before. They're not hidden paintings, they aren't secret paintings. But a number of museums, the National Gallery, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Tate in London, and another institution I can't think of right now, have decided to postpone the show for 3 years. And it's because they're concerned about their image or their relationship with audiences, particularly Black audiences, by showing this work. And so I think the comment that you're making, Christian, is really important because museums are still struggling with that. There will be people who are African American who will go see the show, and they could see different, they could have different feelings about it, right? There's no one way that all Black people are going to feel. Some people might feel the museum was racist. Some people might feel like, why are you showing this? This is more anti-Black violence. Other people might really see Gustin's work as critical and seeing that we need more white artists who are critical of anti-Black violence. There's no one Black community mind, but I hope someone writes about what actually happens when the show is on view, and to see maybe where that puts museums in terms of their idea of progress and communication with different audiences. So yeah, Harlem on My Mind happened before we were born. And we're still dealing with some of the same issues of museums and Black audiences.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was good. Good to think about. I know we're almost out of time too.
Yeah, we have time for maybe just one last question, if you wouldn't mind, Dr. Cooks.
No, please go ahead. Yes, Kayla.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this talk. I really appreciate it. And I'm actually, I go to Wellesley. So I'm a student of Nikki Green. So
good.
I'm like the outsider in this, but this is a really amazing talk.
That's great. Yeah.
And Riley Watkins, who had to step out there also. Anyway, my question. But I was wondering, I'm really interested in, thank you, Jasmine, in incorporating as much as my time like in Black art as soon as I can when it comes to like internships and such. And I only really am aware of the big museums that have like those internships. And I know they're going to be Eurocentric. And I know that is still something that I should be exposed to, of course, like that's what's around me. But at the same time, do you have any insight into how I would be able to engage with Black art in a sort of like apprenticeship, like internship form?
Yeah, I think all museums need help. And I would say in many cases, museums that focus on African American people are short-staffed and underfunded. So if most of the internships I did, I volunteered. And I also worked full time. So like I ran Piedmont Avenue dry cleaners during the day. And then in the evening, I worked at the Oakland Museum, and I did that for summer. They were happy to have the help. And I think if you can volunteer your services and, in a way that's reasonable, right? Meaning it doesn't have to be a full-time job, but so many hours a week, just so that you can get a sense of who's there, what the priorities are, how they're organized, how you can help them with things. That's really, really valuable. And I remember when I got my first paying job at LACMA, the woman who was the chief curator said one of the reasons she picked me is because I had done internships for free. And that showed her that I was really interested in learning. So, and I think also you could learn from working with a Black curator at a mainstream museum and see how they're navigating that space. Like the National Gallery is searching for someone to focus on their collection that they not inherited, but they paid for it. They bought it from the Corcoran. That job is exciting. And in my mind, for me, I think it would be really difficult to be the Black curator who's responsible for the Black art, but working with that person could be incredible, just to see what the challenges are from the inside, what the benefits are from the inside, and how you might want to change things in the future. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cooks.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And, we've known each other for a really, really long time in art history and sisterhood and curatorial studies, but every time I learn something new and something really exciting. And I know that you've enriched our virtual career week, and we're just on Tuesday, but I can say this has been one of the true highlights, I think, for all of us. And we'll continue to look out for the work that you're doing. You didn't get a chance to talk to us about your forthcoming exhibition, the Black Index, but we'll look out for it because it's opening in January, correct?
Yeah, it opens in January here, and then it's going to travel. It will go to Palo Alto, UT Austin, and then Hunter College in 2022.
All right, well, let's see if we can keep that tour
Yes.
coming all the way out here to Atlanta.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.